The Ed Sullivan Theater buzzed with anticipation as cameras panned across the packed audience. Stephen Colbert strode confidently to his desk, his trademark grin firmly in place as the audience's applause gradually subsided. Seated across from him was Karoline Leavitt, the 25-year-old White House press secretary, whose appearance on The Late Show had generated significant media attention, given the program's typically progressive leanings. Leavitt sat poised in a crisp navy suit, her composure remarkable for someone facing what many expected to be a challenging interview. The tension in the studio was palpable. This was the youngest press secretary in history, appearing on a show that had frequently criticized her administration. So Colbert began leaning forward with the measured timing that had made him a late-night institution. "You're the youngest press secretary ever. I'm curious. What's it like being the adult supervision in this White House?" The audience erupted in laughter and applause at the thinly veiled insult. Close-up cameras caught the momentary flash in Leavitt's eyes as she registered the deliberately provocative opening. The young press secretary adjusted her posture slightly, and in that brief moment, something in her expression changed, not to defensiveness or anger, but to a focused intensity that caught Colbert's attention. What happened next would transform what was meant to be a predictable political skirmish into a viral moment that would leave the studio audience speechless and millions of viewers reconsidering their assumptions about political dialogue in America. Before diving into this extraordinary exchange, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our latest political stories. This confrontation between Stephen Colbert and Karoline Leavitt takes an unexpected turn that no one saw coming. Stephen Colbert had reigned as a late-night television fixture for nearly 2 decades. From his early days on The Daily Show to his Abe satirical character on The Colbert Report, and finally as host of The Late Show, he had built his reputation on sharp political commentary with an unmistakably progressive perspective. His interviews with conservative political figures often became viral moments as he deployed his trademark wit to highlight contradictions or expose weaknesses in their positions. At 59, Colbert represented the established liberal media that many conservatives viewed with suspicion. His audience, primarily urban and progressive, came expecting a particular type of political entertainment, one where conservative guests typically found themselves on the defensive against Colbert's skilled combination of humor and pointed questioning. Karoline Leavitt presented a striking contrast. At just 25, she had already established herself as a formidable political communicator. After serving as an assistant press secretary in the previous administration, becoming the youngest White House spokesperson in history, she had returned with the new administration to claim the top position, breaking historical precedents and generating significant media attention. Critics questioned her qualifications, suggesting her youth made her incapable of handling the position's demands. Supporters pointed to her poised handling of the press corps and her ability to clearly articulate complex policy positions under intense scrutiny. Her background, raised in a small New Hampshire town in a middle-class family, differed markedly from the coastal elite circles that comprised Colbert's primary audience. Stakes of this television appearance extended beyond personal reputations. For Colbert, the interview represented an opportunity to score points against an administration his audience largely opposed. His writers had prepared questions designed to expose Leavitt's youth and inexperience while entertaining his base. For Leavitt, the stakes were even higher. As the public face of the administration, her performance would shape perceptions, not just of her capabilities, but of the White House she represented. A poor showing could reinforce narratives about her inexperience. A defensive response could create viral moments used to undermine administration messaging for weeks to come. Beyond these immediate considerations, the exchange represented something larger. A microcosm of America's increasingly polarized political discourse, Colbert's audience expected him to challenge conservative guests aggressively, just as conservative viewers anticipated that Leavitt would face unfair treatment from mainstream media. The interview seemed primed to reinforce these divisions rather than bridge them. The Late Show's producers had allocated an unusually long segment for the interview, recognizing the potential for memorable television. In the control room, directors prepared for what they anticipated would be a challenging exchange that would generate substantial social media engagement. What no one had prepared for was the possibility that this encounter might transcend the expected script of partisan confrontation. As Colbert's opening jab hung in the air and the audience's laughter subsided, Leavitt prepared to respond to what was clearly meant as the first of many attempts to undermine her credibility and composure on national television. That's actually a fair question. Stephen Leavitt responded, her voice steady and measured, though I suspect not for the reasons your writers intended when they crafted it. The unexpected directness of her response caught Colbert momentarily off guard. He had anticipated either defensive pushback or an attempt at deflection. Standard responses from political guests facing hostile questioning. My writers are innocent, Colbert quipped, regaining his footing. They're just children themselves, much like the administration's economic policy team. From what I hear, the audience laughed appreciatively, and Colbert settled back, expecting to establish control of the interview through these familiar dynamics. But Leavitt didn't follow the expected script. You know, I've watched your show for years, she said, surprising many in the audience. Even when I've disagreed with your perspective, I've appreciated your intelligence and how you've elevated political comedy beyond simple punchlines. That's why I accepted this invitation, despite knowing it might be challenging territory. Colbert nodded, acknowledging the compliment, while preparing his next line of questioning. Speaking of challenging territory, let's talk about your qualifications. Most press secretaries have decades of experience before taking the podium. You were in college just a few years ago. What exactly prepares someone your age to speak for the most powerful office in the world? This was familiar ground, the question about her youth and experience that had followed Leavitt since her appointment. The audience leaned forward, anticipating either a rehearsed talking point or a moment of discomfort. I was wondering how many minutes we'd get before my age became the focus, Leavitt said with a slight smile. 3 minutes and 20 seconds, actually longer than I expected. The audience laughed, but it was a different quality of laughter, not at her expense, but in recognition of her awareness of the situation. Let me address this directly, she continued. The average age in Congress is 59. Exactly your age, Stephen. The median age in the Senate is 65. The average age of cable news viewers is over 60. Meanwhile, the median age of Americans is 38, and the issues we're facing, technological disruption, climate challenges, changing economic models, will impact younger generations most significantly. Colbert attempted to interject with a joke, but Leavitt continued with a polite but firm, "If I may finish this point, my role isn't to claim greater wisdom than people with decades more life experience," she said. "It's to ensure that perspectives from my generation are represented in rooms where decisions affecting our future are made. The question shouldn't be whether someone my age belongs at the table, but whether decisions being made without voices like mine are truly representative of the country's needs." The studio had grown quieter, the audience engaging with the substance of her response, rather than waiting for the next laugh line. Cola, recognizing the shifting dynamic, adjusted his approach. "That's well articulated, but articulation isn't the same as experience. When national security crises emerge, do you really believe your perspective is as valuable as someone who's navigated similar situations before? Of course, experience matters." Leavitt acknowledged that's why the president has surrounded himself with advisors who bring decades of expertise in military, diplomatic, and intelligence matters. "My job isn't to replace their knowledge, but to communicate their expertise effectively while ensuring younger perspectives are considered in policy formation." She leaned forward slightly. "But Stephen, since we're discussing experience, I'm curious what life experiences prepared you to shape political discourse for millions of Americans. Each night you studied philosophy and theater, performed improvisational comedy, and then entered television. That's not a traditional path to political influence either." The audience murmured at the unexpected role reversal. Leavitt asking Colbert about his qualifications rather than defending her own. It wasn't delivered as an attack, but as a genuine question that highlighted the arbitrary nature of which non-traditional backgrounds face scrutiny and which don't. Colbert, to his credit, recognized the effective pivot. "Touché, I suppose I've been influencing political opinions without a political science degree for years." But he continued, shifting back to offense. I'm not speaking on behalf of the president. You're right, Leavitt nodded. You're speaking to millions of Americans 4 nights a week, shaping their understanding of complex issues through comedy and interviews. I'd argue that carries its own significant responsibility. The exchange had moved beyond the expected script into something more substantive. Colbert, recognizing that standard gotcha questions might not yield the expected results against his prepared opponent, shifted to policy substance. Let's talk about climate policy. Then he said, your administration has rolled back environmental regulations while young Americans overwhelmingly support stronger climate action. How do you square representing a younger generation while advancing policies that many in that generation oppose? That's a much better question than asking about my age, Leavitt replied. The administration's approach to environmental challenges focuses on technological innovation and market-based solutions rather than regulatory frameworks that may hinder economic growth. We believe developing next-generation nuclear carbon capture and renewable technologies offers more sustainable long-term solutions than regulations that often shift production to countries with fewer environmental standards, she continued. Many young Americans, including those who disagree with our approach, share the desire for effective environmental stewardship. We differ on methods, not goals. That's healthy democratic debate about means rather than ends. The audience, expecting political theater, found themselves listening to a substantive policy discussion. Colbert, recognizing the interview was evolving beyond the anticipated format, adjusted again. Your ability to stay on message is impressive, he said, attempting to regain control through humor. I'm starting to wonder if you're actually 25 or just a very well-preserved 60-year-old political operative. The audience laughed, but the dynamic had shifted. What had begun as an attempt to highlight Leavitt's youth and inexperience had instead showcased her ability to engage substantively while gently challenging the premises of Colbert's questioning. The exchange was building toward a moment that would transform the interview from expected partisan confrontation into something neither the host audience nor millions of viewers had anticipated. Colbert, recognizing that policy debates weren't yielding the viral moments his show thrived on, shifted to more personal territory. Let's talk about what it's like working for this president. We've heard reports of significant staff turnover and challenging workplace dynamics. Off the record, blink twice if you need rescuing. The audience laughed as Colbert pantomimed a covert blink, clearly expecting this line of questioning to create more discomfort than policy discussions had. Instead, Leavitt's response would transform the interview entirely. You know, Stephen, she began, her tone shifting slightly. Before coming on tonight, I watched clips of your interview with President Obama back in 2016. You asked him thoughtful questions about the weight of decision-making, about balancing public service with family life, about how the office changes the person who holds it. She paused for a brief moment. They were insightful questions that treated public service as a serious calling rather than just fodder for punchlines. They showed respect for the office while still maintaining your perspective and humor. Colbert nodded slightly clearly, recognizing the interview she referenced. I understand that my boss isn't your preferred president. Leavitt continued, I respect that completely. It's what makes democracy function. But I've noticed something over the past years that concerns me, not as a Republican or as press secretary, but as an American who cares about our ability to function as a society across differences. The studio had grown remarkably quiet, the audience sensing something authentic unfolding that transcended the expected political combat. We've lost the ability to disagree about policies while recognizing that people across the political spectrum are generally trying to make the country better, according to their understanding of what better means, Leavitt said. Instead, we assign the worst possible motives to those we disagree with, treating political differences as moral failings rather than good faith disagreements about complex issues. Colbert started to interject with a joke to lighten the moment, but something in Leavitt's expression, not confrontational, but genuinely concerned, gave him pause. My generation hasn't really experienced functional politics, she continued. We've grown up with gridlock government shutdowns and increasing polarization. The adults in the room, and I use that phrase intentionally, given your opening question, haven't demonstrated how to disagree productively or govern collectively across differences. She leaned forward slightly. Your platform gives you a unique opportunity, Stephen. You can continue treating half the country as either malevolent or stupid for their political views, which makes for easy applause lines but deepens our divisions. Or you can use your extraordinary communication gifts to help Americans recognize our shared humanity across political differences, even while maintaining your progressive perspective. The audience sat in complete silence. Not the awkward silence of a failed joke, but the weighted silence of unexpected authenticity in a space typically defined by performative conflict. I accepted your invitation tonight, knowing I'd likely be the punchline to numerous jokes, Leavitt said. I came anyway because I believe we need to start seeing each other as fellow Americans rather than just political opponents. My generation's future depends on rediscovering that capacity. She smiled slightly. So yes, you can continue with questions designed to make me appear foolish or uninformed. I'll do my best to answer them, but I think your audience deserves more than watching you attempt to embarrass a guest who was willing to enter what we both know is somewhat hostile territory in the hope of demonstrating that conversation across differences remains possible. The studio remained silent as her words hung in the air. Cameras caught audience members exchanging glances, processing the unexpected departure from the anticipated script of political combat. Colbert himself appeared momentarily caught between his role as satirical host and recognition of the authentic challenge Leavitt had presented. After a moment that felt longer than it actually was, Colbert set aside his prepared note cards. That's a fair point, he said, his tone shifting from performative interviewer to more authentic engagement. And probably something all of us in this business should reflect on. So let's try something different. What's one thing you wish more Americans on my side of the political spectrum understood about your administration's goals? The question represented a remarkable pivot from attempting to create viral moments at Leavitt's expense to inviting genuine dialogue across political differences. The audience, initially primed for political blood sport, now witnessed something far more compelling. Two people with significant differences finding a way to engage substantively rather than performatively. Leavitt nodded appreciatively at the shift. I wish more Americans understood that despite policy disagreements, this administration genuinely wants to create economic opportunity for all communities, strengthen American innovation, and leave the country more prosperous and secure. We have different methods than progressive approaches, but the goals of expanding opportunity aren't so different, she continued. Similarly, I should acknowledge that despite my disagreements with progressive policies, I know they come from a genuine desire to create a more equitable and just society. We can disagree about methods while acknowledging the sincerity of each other's motivations. What had begun as an attempted humiliation had transformed into something neither the audience nor millions of viewers had expected. A moment of authentic connection across political differences that demonstrated an alternative to the polarized discourse dominating American public life. As the segment concluded and Colbert thanked Leavitt for her appearance, the audience applause carried a different quality than the partisan approval that typically accompanied political guests. It reflected recognition of something authentic that had transcended the expected performance of political combat. Something many Americans hungered for but rarely encountered in their media consumption. The confrontation that had begun with Colbert's attempt to highlight Leavitt's youth and inexperience had revealed something entirely different. A young political figure capable of transcending partisan performance to articulate a vision of engagement across differences that resonated beyond political boundaries. Clips of the exchange between Stephen Colbert and Karoline Leavitt spread across social media platforms with extraordinary speed. What made the interaction compelling wasn't the familiar partisan combat that typically generated engagement, but its opposite, the authentic conversation that emerged when Leavitt challenged the very premise of political entertainment at her expense. Major news outlets picked up the story with headlines reflecting its unexpected nature. Late night surprise, Colbert-Leavitt exchange transcends partisan combat. Washington Post 25-year-old press secretary flips script on late-night veteran New York Times from confrontation to conversation. How Leavitt changed the tone on Colbert Politico. The audience's reaction inside the studio reflected the wider response. As the cameras stopped rolling, several audience members approached Leavitt to express appreciation, not for her politics, but for her willingness to engage authentically in what had been set up as a hostile environment. Multiple attendees posted on social media about their surprise at finding themselves respecting someone with whom they disagreed politically. Media analysts dissected the exchange on morning programs across networks. On CNN, political commentator David Axelrod observed, "What made this moment significant wasn't Leavitt's defense of specific policies. It was her ability to step outside the expected script and challenge the framework of political entertainment itself." She didn't just respond to Colbert's questions. She questioned the premises underlying how we conduct our political discourse. On Fox News, commentators highlighted how Leavitt had maintained composure while redirecting the conversation. She demonstrated that conservative voices can engage effectively in mainstream media environments without either becoming defensive or abandoning their principles, noted analyst Dana Perino. Perhaps most significantly, the exchange sparked conversations about the nature of political media and its contribution to polarization. The Atlantic published an essay titled "Entertainment versus Engagement: What the Colbert-Leavitt Moment Reveals About Political Media," which argued our political entertainment ecosystem rewards performative conflict rather than substantive engagement across differences. Both Colbert and Leavitt revealed the possibility of something more constructive when they momentarily stepped outside their assigned roles. Within political circles, the interview generated substantial discussion. Democratic strategists privately acknowledged that Leavitt had demonstrated effective communication that transcended typical partisan boundaries. She connected with viewers who don't share her politics by appealing to shared concerns about functional democracy. One senior Democratic advisor told Politico, "That's something all political communicators should study carefully." For the administration, the interview represented an unexpected communications victory. Press coverage that had previously focused primarily on Leavitt's youth now addressed her substantive communication skills and ability to navigate challenging media environments. Several cabinet secretaries requested her guidance before their own media appearances, recognizing the effectiveness of her approach. Colbert himself addressed the interview on his next show, demonstrating his own capacity for self-reflection. "Last night, something unusual happened at this desk," he told his audience. "A political guest challenged me to consider whether our political entertainment, including sometimes this show, contributes to the divisions making governance more difficult. It's worth thinking about even while maintaining our perspective and sense of humor," he added. "I've built a career on political satire, and I still believe humor is essential for processing our political reality. But there's a difference between satire that speaks truth to power and content that simply reinforces tribal identities. I'm still figuring out where that line is. We all are." The impact extended beyond immediate media coverage. Several universities incorporated the exchange into media studies and political communication courses. Professor Robert McChesney of the University of Illinois noted, "This interaction will be studied for years as a moment when the performance of political combat was interrupted by an authentic challenge to its underlying premises. Both participants demonstrated capacity to step outside their assigned roles in ways that revealed possibilities for more constructive political discourse." For Leavitt personally, the interview transformed public perception of her capabilities. While policy disagreements remained, critics now addressed her position substantively rather than dismissing her based on age or experience. Job offers from major media organizations, political consulting firms, and academic institutions arrived at her office, though she remained committed to her role as press secretary. Perhaps most significantly, the exchange sparked genuine self-reflection among media figures about their role in America's polarization. Several late-night hosts and political commentators privately contacted Leavitt to acknowledge the legitimacy of her challenge, with some adjusting their approach to include more substantive engagement with diverse political perspectives. 6 months after the interview, Leavitt and Colbert appeared together at a media ethics conference at Columbia Journalism School, discussing how political entertainment might maintain its critical function and humor while contributing to more constructive democratic discourse. Their joint appearance, unimaginable before their viral exchange, demonstrated the possibility of engagement across differences that the original interview had revealed. The story of Stephen Colbert's attempted insult of Karoline Leavitt and her response that left the audience speechless ultimately transcended the immediate political moment. It provided a template for how Americans might engage across their deepest political divides. Not by abandoning their principles or perspectives, but by recognizing the humanity and good faith of those with whom they disagree. In a nation increasingly defined by political tribalism, the exchange demonstrated something essential: that authentic engagement across differences remains possible when participants are willing to step outside the performative roles assigned to them by a media ecosystem that rewards conflict over understanding and combat over conversation. If you found this breakdown of the extraordinary exchange between Stephen Colbert and Karoline Leavitt informative, don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of significant political moments. Share your thoughts in the comments below about whether this model of engagement could help address America's political polarization. We'll be following developments and bringing you exclusive analysis of how this unexpected moment continues to influence public discourse in our divided nation.